Hi, everybody, and welcome to this edition of Macro Pro and Friends, our special series on cops and claims, mental health issues. I'm joined today with Wendy Stevens. Hi, Wendy. How are you?
Hi, Diane. I'm well, thank you.
Are you well? Because I hear something's going to happen on September 5th.
Okay, it's not something I typically share, but I did. When I see people in person, they say, "Oh, what'd you do to your leg?" Well, I had an argument with uneven pavement, and they reconstructed the tendon, and it deconstructed itself. So we're going to do that again. So, kind of looking forward to that.
Well, all of us are going to wish you well and hope that this time the surgery takes perfectly. And your clients love to know these things about you, and they want to say good things and send you healing thoughts. So thanks for allowing me to share that with everybody. So how are things there in Northern California?
We're getting a little warm again. We had a little bit of drizzle, some tinkly little rain yesterday, but other than that, I'm in Santa Rosa, so we're getting warm again. We're getting kind of warm, and it gets warm up here more than people realize. So, you know, we would love a quick and easy fire season so we can have some good rain.
Yeah, absolutely. Our hearts are with those people, you know, in Lahaina. That's just really terrible what's happened. Okay, well, everybody, this is a really cool three-part series. We're so glad that you were able to join us. And if you weren't able to join us for the first part, what should they do, Wendy?
Well, you can go to our YouTube channel, or you can email me at wendy@macropro.com, and I can send a link to you so that you can watch the first portion of this three-part series, and then you can join next week for the third part. And also, if you have questions after the presentation for Jeff Nix, our presenter, you're welcome to email me, and I'm happy to send you his contact information.
Okay, so real quickly, this webinar is worth 1 CEU for California. You need to be logged on with the link that they sent you. You cannot be on the telephone, sadly. They cannot take your time in attendance. Your certificates will arrive within 2 hours of the end of this presentation. We have handouts, so make sure that you download those now while the webinar is going. If you have any questions for Jeff, please be sure to put them in the question box, and Wendy and I will be asking him those questions. And then lastly, like Wendy said, if you want to watch it again, you could do so on the Macro Pro YouTube channel. So Wendy, I'm going to leave this to you now.
Okay, thank you, Diane. Jeff, you want to pop on? I would like to introduce Jeff Nix, who is presenting a three-part series, and this is the second of the three-part series on the mental health of police officers. Jeff's experience includes 30 years as a police and fire professional. He was with the city of Rohnert Park, which is one of 2 agencies in the state of California where officers were trained and work in both police and fire disciplines. While at the city of Rohnert Park Department of Public Safety, Jeff was a police lieutenant and a fire battalion chief. He specialized in police and fire operations, criminal investigations, emergency management, peer support, and officer wellness. He holds a bachelor's degree in criminal justice management, California Peace Officer Standards and Training Management Certificate, and is a graduate of the Sherman Block California Post Supervisory Leadership Institute. Jeff received the Rohnert Park Department of Public Safety Medal of Valor. He is also the recipient 3 times of life-saving medals. Jeff is currently an adjunct faculty member and Basic Police Academy coordinator at the Santa Rosa Junior College Public Safety Training Center. We're fortunate to have Jeff bring his vast experience to our Macro Pro and Friends Summer School Series. Thanks for joining us, Jeff. We certainly appreciate your time.
Well, thank you, Wendy. I'm so grateful to be here. I wish I could see everybody's faces that are out there listening, and hopefully by the time we're done with our session today, and after finishing last week, hopefully all of you are gaining a little bit more perspective on what it's like to be a police officer and some of the challenges that we face day to day, and trying to be normal. I don't know what that looks like. I know I'm pretty tainted after a 30-year career, but I'm trying to set myself up and others for success, and that's kind of the main goal that I have with speaking to you today. I'm, again, like I led with last week, I'm not going to fill your minds with any grand things about cops and painting a picture that we're all great people, but I do believe that we all start with great intentions, and then over the course of careers, sadly things happen and we're exposed to, and so it's difficult to make those different transitions throughout the career. If I may, I just want to recap session 1. For those of you that weren't with us last week, we talked about who becomes a police officer and kind of the whys behind people become police officers. We talked about military vets and what we call legacies, those that have family members or parents, relatives that were police officers, and then your average Joe or Jolene, those folks, and really what a diverse group it is that kind of forms the law enforcement family. And there's no such thing as that cookie cutter cop, at least anymore. I remember kind of back when I was going through the hiring process that we would have 200-300 people in the process, and we'd fill one position out of those 200 or 300 people. And it seemed like every person that was hired was kind of cut from the same mold, and which honestly wasn't a great representation of the communities that we serve. And so we've done a much better job, even though we're not getting people clawing at and standing in lines wanting to be cops nowadays, but we are taking that look at what makes up the demographic of the communities that we serve, and then trying to draw from those demographics into our hiring pool and to our the forces that we serve in. And so again, there's no cookie cutter cop out there, and I think that's we're seeing now how that is helpful to the communities that we serve. I also talked about how cops are wired, and that we're wired different, and we run into the problem while everyone else is running away from the problem, and so in order to do that, you have to be wired a little bit different, and our first instinct can't be to turn and go the other way. It has to be to run towards the gunfire, which for all intents and purposes, I mean, that's not normal for somebody to be wired that way. And so I guess it's a blessing and a curse that I was able to do that, but I had that mentality, and but fortunately, like Wendy said, I work for the city of Rohnert Park, and it's a smaller bedroom community, but I know there's many of you out there that work with major metropolitan departments, in Los Angeles or Oakland or San Francisco or wherever you may be, but where you have 1,000 officers or 500 officers or whatever it is. It's a lot different because of the amount of calls that you get. So again, I know the officers in Rohnert Park are wired different from officers that are in Oakland or Los Angeles, and so I'm not here to say that one is worse than the other, but we're all wired a little bit differently just to be able to do our job. And I also talked about why some calls impact us more greatly than others. And what I mean by that is, I've gone through my career, and I've had the drowning of a 4-year-old boy. I've had the child suicides. I've had the major car accidents, and you name it, I've had it. But the frequency that I've experienced it is probably different than the frequency of those that work in a larger department. But those calls for service that make an impact on us, and oftentimes we can relate some of those things to our personal family lives, and this 4-year-old child, maybe I had a 4-year-old child at home, or the officers that responded to that scene had young children. And so there's always this dynamic that we're put into, that we have to face it. And then lastly, we talked about how we care for police officers in the immediate aftermath of a critical incident, and the steps that we're trying to make now that are becoming more mainstream. And those are, peer support and critical incident stress debriefs, and mental health professionals that are assigned to, police officers that have a background in police psychology. And so those are some of the things we talked about during session 1. If anybody has any questions or anything about session 1, I can certainly answer those. But in regards to today, and ironically, before I start in, I was on my Facebook page this morning, and a post popped up, and it said, "Stop saying it's what they signed up for. No one signs up for anything hoping to be hated, injured, or killed. They sign up to make a difference." And so I believe in my heart of hearts that's a true statement. And I find it ironic because I'm giving this presentation today, and I believe that when I signed up to do this job, that I wanted to make a difference. And I heard a quote somewhere, if I can remember who said it, I'll reference that, but it was, I may not be able to change the world, but I may be able to change one person's world. And so every day I went to my job, I tried to have that impact on somebody. And oftentimes the impact I had as a police officer, it ended up having negative connotations because I was maybe taking someone's freedoms away and taking them to jail, or taking children from a home because of the abuse that's going on. And so those are rough decisions and tough things that we have to do. But I really think that at the end of the day, I just wanted to make a difference. And I know in the heart of heart, in every officer's heart of hearts, they do want to make a difference. Through their tough exterior, through their tainted exterior, 99.9% of them really have a heart of gold and want to do the right thing for the right reasons, for the right people. And I think that making a difference really is a big deal. Today we're going to talk about the importance of department leadership and support. As a police lieutenant, I had a different, I had to take the 30,000-foot view over what was going on in our organization. And so the way our command staff structure was, it was officer, sergeant, lieutenant, deputy chief, and chief. On the fire side, since we did both, it was firefighter, captain. Every sergeant was a captain. Every lieutenant was a battalion chief, and then the deputy chiefs are deputy chiefs across lines. And then the chief was the chief of both police and fire. But I had to look at leadership a little bit different. And what I want to do before I really dive into this is, what are some of the characteristics that we and qualities of a good leadership? And this may be a reminder to some of you, and you may be able to add to this list. I just have a few things written down that I wanted to share that I think make up a good leader. And that's, the first is communication, good communication skills, having great emotional intelligence, integrity, accountability, confidence, humility, decision maker, they're creative, problem solver, resilient, decisiveness, honest, empathetic. And I think the most important thing that we need to develop as leaders is we need to develop trust up and down the rank structure. And because if officers don't trust their command staff, then we're all dead in the water, because we fulfill a need for the officers and the officers fulfill a need for us, and it's a a give and take relationship that we can support each other in. But if the trust isn't there, it's very, very difficult to accomplish anything for good for the department. I do want to talk about some other qualities that aren't necessarily good, that I'm sure we're all aware of somebody or some few. Egos are a big part of leadership, or what happens on test day is they say all the right things, and then as soon as they get into that leadership position, man, their ego takes over, and then they become dictators and they forget the common goal. They're great on test day. They took a great test, but they have no idea the magnitude of their job and how it affects personnel. And then there's those people that are in the chief's ear, in the deputy chief's ear, and bringing them coffee, and they're sucking up to the boss every possible way they can. And when those people get promoted, there's no foundation behind them. So it's difficult to address every situation when you don't have the right perspective and understand what leadership is really about. And so where is leadership and the support? If there's no leadership buy-in in regards to officer wellness and peer support programs and those things that really have, well, we need to have the officer's best interests in hand. Those that are on the front line, we need to make sure that we are meeting their needs. And because basically as leaders, we want to create longevity for our employees, and that's having them work in an environment when they feel like they're supported. And so it's hard to address situations when leadership, there's no buy-in. And we're going to talk about those things at length. I'm going to try without skipping a slide. I need to move my camera over just a hair. There we go. So I can read.
Jeff,
yeah.
While you're doing that, we got a question in.
Sure.
It says, to what degree is the perception among police officers on temporary modified work duty to the workers' comp injury that it is a punishment?
Oh, that's a great question. And it depends. So I can speak out of experience from our agency where, oftentimes when people go out on an injury, and we're going to address this more throughout this presentation, but when people go out on an injury, oftentimes they're put on an island, and they don't have the normal day-to-day contact with their peers, with their supervisors or command staff. It's just they're put out there and they're basically left on their own to go through these processes. And so what we've done in Rohnert Park is we've have this peer support team where we assign peers or friends, hey, just make continued contact with them, just to let them know that we're still thinking about them and we care about them, and if there's anything that we can do to help facilitate better conversation, get more information either from HR, the workers' comp folks, we want to try and help out with that process. But it seems like nowadays there's been a swing in how things are looked at. When I signed up, and we're going to talk about this later on, but when I signed up, it was, dude, suck it up and get back out there. So you sprained your ankle, put the high tops on, tape it up, and let's go, because we're not running short on our shift. And that was just the mentality that you were wired with. You just didn't you didn't call in sick, you didn't really report an injury. But now, based on who these officers were hiring, and the way the climate of how officer wellness is going, we want to know when something's happening. We want to take care of those injuries now so they don't manifest into something greater, especially when it comes to the mental health part. But I do see that we still have some old school ways of thought in leadership positions and in supervisory positions. But then we also have those that are trying to make a difference and trying to meet the needs of those that are injured. And so it's an interesting rub there, trying to get everybody on the same page and knowing the importance of every single employee. Everyone matters, and until they realize that, it kind of goes back to that trust factor. Until they realize that they matter, and that comes from a member of command staff or the entire command staff, expressing those concerns when somebody gets hurt, and then being there along the way, not just hey, we made you a doctor's appointment, you're on your own. And oftentimes I think that's what happens. And so hopefully, as we continue to progress in this field, we'll learn that, man, if we take care of an injury now, we're less likely to be dealing with that injury, whether it's a physical or mental health injury, over a long period of time. And so that's kind of where we're at right now. But in no question, no doubt in my mind that those people that are injured, they feel like they're on an island, and they're all alone in this process. So we need to do a better job on the command staff level, and working with the officers, working with HR, and working with the workers' comp folks. I think it's important that those relationships are built. I hope that answers that question. We're going to talk about the effects of no leadership and no leadership buy-in, what it takes to get the leadership buy-in, and then wellness programs are becoming more and more mainstream. So we'll go through this and get our next slide. So the next slide was, if I can maneuver this right, sorry. So I had stated a while back that there's no police officer who has worked a short, medium, or long career who has not been affected by the things they've seen, heard, or smelled. And so that's a real thing. That is something that we address every day. No matter if you work a 2-year career or a 30-year career, there's things that are out there that are going to impact our lives. So we hinted on this just a minute ago when I answered the question about the leadership mindset, those old school leaders that are there that signed up 30 years ago, 25 years ago, 20 years ago, and it was suck it up, buttercup, get back and go do your job. And it was frowned upon if you ever reported anything or didn't show up to work because you were sick or you were hurt or something was wrong. And now that new generation is here, and there's more of those new generation officers than there is of the old regime. And I'm not saying one is better than the other, they're just different. And so there's been a disconnect between those that are the boots on the ground and command staff. And so we're starting to turn the corner here, because we're getting, those newer, this newer generation is starting to promote up through the ranks and have those thought processes that connect with those boots on the ground employees that we have, and to try and put ourselves in their position. And what I didn't say about the qualities of a good leader, we have to be empathetic to what everybody's job is, and try and find a middle ground there. What happens when there's no leadership buy-in? What the officers think. I know when I was an officer, gosh, I really excuse me, I really didn't care what the lieutenants were doing. I didn't care what the deputy chiefs were doing. And I know the chief was a figurehead that sat on top of the organization. But as I promoted, the more I cared about what was happening, you know, above me and below me. And so it's super important that they understand we know what they're doing. And because oftentimes, you know, they say, gosh, lieutenants, they won't come out to a scene. They don't know what we do. They don't know how we're impacted out here. And in fact, I know there's a rumor out there that I want to dispel right now that, you know, when you promote above the rank of sergeant to a lieutenant or captain, you do not get a lobotomy. You do not forget what, you know, the boots on the ground are doing. Your job is just way different now. I never thought that I would wrap my head around ordering supplies for the department and those type of things. But it was that, again, that 30,000 foot view of making or helping people, you know, or gaining perspective on how to run the organization and how to meet the needs of those that are below me. And last week I talked about an incident that happened in San Francisco, and I was involved in a shooting there. Although I never fired my weapon, the bad guy was the one that shot at us. And so during that investigation, we were confronted with a bad guy that shot 6 rounds through a door, through a wall, and right where we were standing, a stack of Rohnert Park and San Francisco officers. And so once we retreated from that apartment building, I was able to brief some of the San Francisco officers that were going into the building and letting them know what I knew, the intel that I had gathered. But we had no idea where the shooting was coming from. And so once I got out on the street, and I was the detective sergeant at the time, I made a phone call to my investigations lieutenant, and he didn't answer the phone. And then I tried to call the patrol lieutenant, and he didn't answer the phone. And then I called the chief, who was laying at home in bed watching the 11 o'clock news. And what was on the news? This incident that was occurring in San Francisco that 3 Rohnert Park officers initiated. But he didn't know about the Rohnert Park element. And so when I explained it to him, I said, yeah, boss, this is us. We were involved with that. And he says, okay, well, you know, if you know, just get home safe and we'll talk tomorrow. And in the heat of the moment, you know, there were still things that I had to do as a supervisor, but in the heat of the moment, I just kind of discarded that. But later that same night, after they had shot and killed the bad guy, and it was the first time in San Francisco history that they gave the green light over the radio to actually shoot and kill somebody. And so we were sequestered. The 3 of us from Rohnert Park were sequestered at the Hall of Justice down in San Francisco. And we're waiting there for 3-4 hours before we were interviewed by their personnel, because anytime there's an officer involved shooting, you have to be interviewed. And so we were interviewed, and during that 3 to 4 hour waiting period, because of the magnitude of this, the 3 Rohnert Park officers, we laughed, thinking, oh my gosh, are we gonna have jobs when we get home? Look what, you know, we initiated. We cried because we didn't know what our next move was or what was going to happen. So after we were interviewed, we went back to, and again, no phone call from either one of the lieutenants, and the chief never called us back. We got back the next morning about 5 a.m. and we were able to go home, hopefully sleep for an hour, and then take a shower and get back to work, because in Rohnert Park, detectives are also the crime scene investigators. So because we had one of our murder suspects in San Francisco, we had to go process that crime scene for our evidence, in addition to San Francisco processing their scene for an officer-involved shooting. And so that day, all of my detectives were able to go. 3 of us, which were involved in that scene the night before, again, no call, no contact from any of our command staff. So now all this is resonating with us. And as we walked through the crime scene and where we stood in the hallway in the stack, as we went in the front door, we saw the 6 bullet holes that went right through the wall, right where we were standing. And for all intents and purposes, every one of us that were standing in that stack should have been shot. I retreated out the door and up the staircase that was to the left of the front door. And when I went back the next day, there were 2 bullet holes in that wall about chest high that when we ran past, the bad guy shot through the wall. And so now all this is having playing a pretty heavy toll on us, and we're still having to process this crime scene. So make a long story longer, we get back late that afternoon, still no contact from either lieutenant or the chief again. And so that the following Monday or Tuesday, I had called a meeting with our command staff and explained to them what the damage they had done by not being there and not being present. And so that fed the fire of, hey, you don't realize what we do. You have no clue what we're doing out there in the field. And by you not showing up, really paints a big picture of this command staff. We were met with hugs and apologies after that. They said they had no idea. But what had happened, and I still, get twisted up about that and the lack of response. So what did that do to me? How did I, transition there? I knew that when I promoted to lieutenant, I would never do things like that. I would always just go and be present, even though I may not do anything but get people coffee or water or bring them food. I was at least there and I was present. The officers nowadays, they want to know what you are doing, what the leadership, what the command staff is doing for them, especially when they need help. In that incident from San Francisco, we needed help and we didn't get it. And so again, that painted a dark, negative picture on how our command staff was. And so I didn't want to repeat that cycle at all once I promoted. Anyhow, I talk about me, and I don't mean to make it sound like it's all about me, but it's just the experience I had. Let's talk for a minute about the difference between the officers and civilians. All of you, I'm sure, can picture a time when you drove by a traffic accident that was really bad, or you saw something, maybe it was the beginning or middle of a critical incident, and it just wasn't right, but you were able to, you saw it, and then you kept driving, or whatever your role was, you continued to go about your life. The difference between that civilian and the officer is the officers, they go, they stay, they investigate, they interview, they process the crime scene, they go back to the office, they write a report, and then they go to court on it a year or two later, and there's still this case, what they see, heard, and smelled is still very prominent in their life, because they haven't been able to let go of that, because it's just an ongoing process. And so that's one of the major differences that officers have is unfortunately, we can't let it go, very easily. These things resonate with us for quite some time because of the process it takes, to investigate and to convict if there's a bad guy involved. In regards to responding for calls, we may go to that bad call. We had an officer that was and I think I talked about this last week. We had an officer, his very first day on the field training program, he had a suicide by gun, and it was a very, very graphic scene that he had seen on his very first day. But he has to be there with the body. He's waiting for the coroner. There's things that he has to do. And then when he gets done wrapping that up and it's finished with that, there's another call for service to go to. And then there's another call for service to go to. And then once you think that, okay, I've gotten past this initial suicide and I've gone to these other calls, I have to go back to the station and now write about that suicide, that graphic incident that I just had. And so when you have no leadership buy-in, you don't know what's happening with your officers. Unfortunately, that same officer during that same week, he was called to another suicide by gun. And then his very last shift of that first week, in his beat, in his patrol area, he was dispatched to yet another suicide by firearm. And when I heard that call come out, he happened to be in the station report writing, and I went down there and I said, "You are not going," because I was sensitive to what he was responding to. And so that, not having that perspective, we just continue to send officers to these bad call after bad call after bad call, and when there's no leadership buy-in, you don't care. You just keep sending them because that's their job, and they're supposed to do it. But when we're looking for the longevity of these officers, we really have to take into consideration their mental health and the impact that has. How do we provide that support? What does that look like to the officers, to those that are responding? First of all, we need to see the value in everything that we do. I'll give you an example. When I first started, I was very involved with community-oriented policing, and working in the city I lived with, I knew it was important that I had to, not just while I was working, but I had to, give back to the community that I live in and I serve in. And so I saw the value of being proactive and developing relationships with folks. That's where leadership within a police department, they need to see the value in having, a proactive program. If we can see and project a proactive action plan when we know there's inherent risks, we know that officers are going to respond to pretty graphic, brutal calls for service, and they will go again, and they will go again and go again. So what are we doing? How do we lend them support, and how do we see the value in that support to these officers? Is we need to be proactive. And the example that I just gave you, where I went down the hall and told the officer, "You're not going," well, that was proactive. And could I have done that on call number 2? Yes, I could have. So what I'm trying to get across is, this isn't a perfect, or it isn't a science in regards to leadership and how we do things, but we need to be aware of what our folks are doing and what they're exposed to, and have proactive measures in place to address situations. We know there's an inherent risk. So if we're sitting on our hands not doing anything, then we are not providing that support or buy-in. When they see leadership or command staff, interjecting for their well-being, that's when you start, making these changes, and that's when you start getting the buy-in, not only from command staff, because you're seeing the change in behavior and culture from the boots on the ground, but it affects morale when they see a command staff member doing something, for somebody else or to help prevent something from happening. It has a deep impact on morale. Some of the things that we have now that addresses the officer's immediate needs, and I touched on this last week, super important that departments have a robust peer support program. And now in talking to several of my peers, and Sonoma County is made up with some larger agencies, but it's made up of several very small agencies where they may have 12 officers. And so robust to them may be 2 of those. But in Rohnert Park, I was happy when I left. I was happy to say we had 19 peer support members, which was a very diverse group that met the needs of a very diverse, our very diverse employees. And so I was very happy about that. But a peer support team that our officers can go have someone to talk to when they feel like something's not right. And then those peer support folks, excuse me, can turn around and we can address the needs of those officers that are hurting and get them extra professional help if that's what they need. We do have our critical incident stress debriefs. And I know in Rohnert Park, it was within 24 hours after a critical incident, we would have a debrief where we bring in the mental health professional, and they would facilitate a debrief from all those that were involved. And so those have become very mainstream with I know Rohnert Park and a lot of other a lot of agencies. Those are more and more mainstream. And so I'm happy that those things are in place. And those few things help create that level of support to the line staff. And I hate this us and them mentality, but it's real. And the fact that they forget that I used to be a police officer when I promoted. I was right down there in the trenches with them, but they forget that. And so we need to offer that support. We need to offer that leadership. We need to offer that buy-in and express that buy-in to them, so they develop the trust and we develop the trust in them, that they have an out. And I think that's one of the most important things is knowing that you have an out. You're not, your back is not against the wall if you're having nightmares or you're having these, sweats or you think you want to, drink your pain away. I think it's important that they realize there's other mechanisms out there that are in place for them. We came up with a program, and I'm not on the board of directors, and I don't get any kickbacks from this company, but we use a company called Cordico, and they I think it's CORDICO, and they are a web-based app that you have on your phone. And so if I can click the button that activates Cordico, and it can give me immediate resources right there. It can give me a self-assessments. What's going on with my sleep? Am I drinking too much? Am I using prescription meds? Am I getting headaches? Am I anxious? I can address all those needs confidentially within this app, and I also have access to peer support. I also have access to police mental health folks. And so that's another thing that we've done to help officers with immediate needs. And I really have seen an impact on morale when they know that they're being cared for, because word travels fast. If a member of command staff doesn't do something, oh my gosh, you think the plague has spread and everyone's going to die. But when command staff does do something, there's that level of respect that is formed and the trust that is formed. I want to address triggers. I know I talked about triggers during the last session, and as soon as command staff recognizes that triggers are real, I think we'll get a better hand on addressing those triggers at the time, the actual time that things are happening. Last week I talked about an officer that worked for Novato PD that responded into a young girl. This is while he was in Novato, a young girl that hung herself in her closet with a belt. Several years later, he gets hired with Rohnert Park and he gets dispatched to that suicide, young girl hanging in her closet by a belt. When he arrived on scene, he saw the same things that he saw in Novato. He ran out and I met him at the end of the driveway, and I immediately recognized that this is something that he had gone through before. And so I pulled him from the investigation. I pulled him away and I removed him from the actual scene. But it made me realize that these triggers, even when we think we've dealt with them, we still carry them around. We compartmentalize and we still carry these things around, and it may be the smell of something that triggers you. It may be the sight of something, or maybe the sound. I can only reflect on my own experience where when we had several train versus pedestrian accidents at this one particular railroad crossing, the train would travel anywhere between 55 and 75 miles an hour in this stretch. And after I saw and witnessed what trains do to humans and the absolute destruction of the human body, what happens, I got anxious every time I drove over those train tracks. I was very sensitive to looking at the arms that were coming down, the red lights flashing, and every time I would drive by there, it was like I held my breath. And even though I was driving safely, everything was fine, it still triggered something inside of me where, what the heck is going on? Am I, every time I go over train tracks, am I gonna be feeling this way? And so after I got over the stigma of, man, I don't want to be perceived as weak, and I wasn't even the primary officer that responded to these pedestrian versus trained, and so how can I, feel the way I feel? And so it was difficult for me to just own that something was going on inside me until I talked to, one of my peers, one of the people I confide in, and he says, you know what, me too. And so it made me realize, unfortunately through my own experience, that triggers are real. And so when I see a train, it doesn't matter if it's on that section of tracks or anywhere else in town, I have this little bell that goes off in my mind that I just need to be cognizant of what's happening. So what does this mean as far as triggers? And I talked about just a minute ago about addressing things right away. Well, so this is all relatively new coming out. These programs of peer support and wellness are becoming more and more mainstream, and that's great for these new officers that are like the one officer that his first day of FTO. We have things in place, and we're going down a road with him to help him be better. But what does this do to those officers that were before that they experienced things before we had all these mechanisms in place? What have they done with their own baggage that they've carried along with them? And so what we are doing is trying to address those officers and the cumulative stress that they've tried to mask or compartmentalize over years, and trying to mitigate those things from manifesting into something horrible down the road for them. And so this is one of the only times I like to go backwards. Most of the time I'm a forward thinker, and I don't like to look in the rearview mirror. But if I fail to look in the rearview mirror, or if we fail to look in the rearview mirror of the things that have happened before these wellness programs have come into mainstream, then we're failing our folks. And so we really have to be cognizant to all those that have come before, and have this cumulative stress that they've been dealing with, and be very cognizant that there are triggers out there. And I think, again, we talked about the qualities of a good leader are those communications and the emotional intelligence. We really have to have that emotional intelligence with the officers that we work with and that serve with us, serve underneath us. It's just super, super important that we don't discard those things. So as I stated, wellness programs are becoming mainstream, and there's a variety of programs that are out there. And the one thing that I don't really buy into, only because the program that we started in Rohnert Park was really a grassroots, boots on the ground program, and I'll get into that here in just a second. But there are programs out there that, yes, we do debriefs, and that's all we do. We've got a wellness program, and that's it. Boom, check the box. We can let city council, we can let the city manager know that we've got a program because we have these debriefs. I think, honestly, we're failing people if we're just checking the box. There are programs out there that can be purchased. There's people making a ton of money going to departments saying, hey, we've got this wellness program in a box, and you spend this much money and we'll give you this much service. You spend this much money and we'll give you this and this. And some of those programs include, hey, if you go to the gym 10 times during the month, we're going to give you this awesome water bottle. And I just scratch my head and wonder what are we gaining? How are we helping our folks with a program that is purchased? Let me explain to you how we did it in Rohnert Park. I was having discussions with some of our officers about the need for a wellness program, and I said, trying to be a good leader, I said, okay, do some research, give me everything that you had, write it up and present it to me. Well, bless their hearts, they went to the internet, they looked up wellness programs, and they printed everything off the internet that they could find and said, here you go, here's our our ideas of a wellness program. And so I chuckled to myself, and but then I took that, and then I started asking questions. I broke down what they gave me and looked at how we could benefit and the programs, what we could do at our agency to help our employees. And so I didn't create a wellness program for Rohnert Park. We created a program in Rohnert Park, and I really think that's how you gain momentum, is when you have buy-in from everybody across the board. And so when I received the feedback from the officers that were working on this with me, it was easy for me to present this to the chief and explain to him that if we did not do this, these are the consequences that will occur. We will lose people. We want longevity. We want good work-life balance, and we're not doing that now. So this is a way for us to do it. And so we incorporated, in Rohnert Park, we work Monday through Thursday, or Thursday through Sunday. Thursday being our overlap day, and we typically did our training on Thursdays. And so I had requested a 10-hour training day once a quarter. And so that included doing something physical with everybody. We took them on a workout, or and it wasn't just all the super athletes out there that got something out of it. It was something for everyone to do. So whether that was take them on a hike, whether that was playing kickball or dodgeball or something fun that we can just get away from work and you know, have a good time with one another and build those bonds of trust that I talked about earlier. And then I would have a you know, a mental health professional that came in. We had a finance person come in. We had a child psychologist come in. So we've had all these people with different backgrounds come in and address us during these wellness training days. And I think that was some of our greatest training that we've had, all because several people got together and said, this is what our department needs. And I'm a firm believer of, as a leader, of the power of saying yes. I get it. If somebody asks me if they can travel 65 miles an hour in a 25 mile an hour zone, I'm not going to say yes to that. But if someone presents me with an idea worth looking at, what is the harm in saying yes and putting the work in to make that happen? And so I'm a firm believer of the grassroots, boots on the ground wellness programs that everybody's invested in. We're taking everybody's needs into play.
All right, Jeff, I got a question for you.
Yes.
This question is, are police personnel peer support members unable to provide total confidentiality to the police officers they are supporting? And are the police chaplains the only ones that have complete confidentiality?
So it's chaplains, yes, they hold that within our program, and it depends on how it's written within your department. 99.9% of the time, those peer support conversations are held 100% confidential. If someone's life is at risk, then obviously measures are going to be taken to help, you know, preserve that person and do what's best for that person. But most of the time, the best quality of a peer support member is just to listen. And that's typically all that person who's talking to that peer support person wants to do, is just talk, just get it out. And so those conversations are confidential unless there's a life-threatening you know, thing that may take place. So and that's like that 0.1% that I'm talking about. Does that help? Okay.
I think that does answer the question. Thank you.
Okay. The last slide I have today, or the second to last one, is wellness programs and wellness. Not necessarily the programs, but officer wellness is so important. It needs to be on the forefront of not just leadership. It needs to be on the forefront of everyone. But it takes a commitment of time. It takes a commitment of money, and it takes a commitment of resources. I can speak in Rohnert Park, or for Rohnert Park, because it's what I did there. Is our commitment in time was those training days that we offered. The commitment in money is we have paid money for you know, cell phone apps and other services that we'll talk about, you know, next week, and other resources that we bring into play, like our mental health professionals. So we know it's a culmination of all those things, and I really think that wellness of our officers should speak volumes of how we feel, how command staff feels about our officers when we put their wellness in the forefront. Because if they're no good, if they're struggling at home, if they're struggling in the workplace, what good are they doing for our community? How good of a teammate are they for their other officers? And so why not let's invest in them and get them on the right track so we can continue to build them up and create longevity in our profession. If there's no other questions, I hope that you all got a little bit of an insight on the leadership and what it takes for leadership to have buy-in in or support in these programs, and the importance of buying in officer wellness. It's huge. Next week, I hope you all can join us again, and we're going to talk about what the right mental health treatment for police officers is, and that may really play into your hands beautifully, because that's your business and how we're getting the right help for these officers. And it may not be a one and done. There may be some treatment involved, and we will talk about PTSDs versus PTSI, and I'll share more with you next week. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you, Jeff. We so appreciate that you take the time out of your busy, retired, but busy schedule to give us some information about the things that you are an expert on and things that you've experienced. And we certainly hope that you all can join us next week for our third part of this presentation series, and it's called Getting the Right Mental Treatment for Police Officers. It will certainly be good. If you've missed the first presentation, you are welcome to go to our YouTube channel or send an email, and we'll send you the link to it so that you can watch that and you'll be all caught up. So thank you very much. Diane, do you have anything to add?
Nothing else. Look forward to seeing you guys next week. Do want to remind you that we have a webinar tomorrow, and the webinar is going to be on Medicare set-asides, the changes that have happened in the first half of 2023. So you definitely want to be there to make sure you're up to date on that. You can sign up for that at the Macro Pro website, and we will see you guys later. Thanks again, Jeff. Bye-bye now.